Does reconnective healing operate outside of space and time? Absolutely.
What's space and time?
Well, space and time is actually what we recognize as the fourth dimension. I know that so many of us grew up under the impression that we were three-dimensional beings of height, width, and depth. And Einstein taught us in the 50s that time is the fourth dimension. You can't really have time without distance or space without time. Therefore, it's referred to today as space-time or time-space.
So how do we know that we've moved beyond height, width, depth, and time? This idea of 4D, I agree with you, is becoming perceivable in a way. I always say you kind of have to get beyond yourself to see yourself. And definitely with reconnective healing, we want to look at how do we recognize we're beyond what we'll call 4D, or no longer bound. That's a better way to say it.
Right.
I'm often feeling so bound by the fourth portion, time. It binds me up in a big knot every single day. And then I recognize, wait, that's the beauty of reconnective healing. I can actually recognize that I've moved beyond height, width, depth, and time. So how?
Well,
I'm going to talk about it.
The linear or sequential concept led us from 1, 2, 3 to 4.
Right.
Interestingly enough, if we really understand what happens beyond four-dimensional, it's not four-dimensional because it's no longer linear. So it's not fifth-dimensional, I should say, because it's no longer linear. It's multi-dimensional. And beyond that,
Yes.
Very forward-thinking people in quantum physics are explaining maybe it's not even dimensional because dimensions are, in a sense, separate and distinct. It's scalar in its continued expansion. But I can tell you...
You jumped onto a new big word. Scalar? Let's define scalar.
Okay.
Scalar would be that potentially we are actually experiencing height, width, depth, time, and beyond simultaneously. So we're not leaving one particular dimension, as you just pointed out. We don't leave height in order to get to height and width. We don't leave height and width in order to get to height, width, and depth. And again, just a little tip, got to get beyond yourself to see yourself. This is the most beautiful part, I'm going to say for me, and hopefully for you, of what the reconnective healing intelligence is here to expose, to reveal on our behalf. But again, how does it happen? How do we recognize that we've moved beyond?
Scalar means it's simply increasing. It's not the older concept of what comes next.
Right.
It's not a next. It's a more. It's an expansion.
And I love that. What comes next keeps us trapped consistently, either in some perceived future or hanging on to something that's already happened that we're trying to change. We just relive, and definitely we're ready for that change.
So people would sometimes say, oh, what's next after the reconnective healing frequencies? Nothing, there's more.
Yeah.
There's not a leaving, there's a more. And one of the ways, from your first question that triggered me, into remembering this, is that how do we experience that we're outside of time and space?
Right.
Well, often your interaction with the reconnective healing frequencies or intelligence has your senses all sort of different. For example, first of all, it's very easy to start to see and experience things that you know physically aren't going on, and yet you see them as if they are. You know, a doorway appears in a wall that has no doorway. Someone walks through who anyone else in the room would not see. You hear something, but then your senses start to do something else interesting.
Yes, we start to have, as we've probably expressed a few times in our conversations, this idea of synesthesia. So one of the ways we recognize that we have moved beyond the 4D realm of space and time is that these dimensional perceptions, things that we would find in height or width, depth, and time, start to evolve. For instance, you might taste time. You might hear a color. So this first indicator, I'm going to say, not everybody perceives it quite in the way that I'm, expressing it. We don't want you to like run around and try to smell time. It actually is something that presents itself. You're receiving, and that's really, really key here. You're not out searching to have this more than 4D experience. It is almost as if, and this is another key point that we always talk about, your awareness becomes the observer. So awareness itself presents itself. And how is going to be the next question. How does this happen?
It could be. Now, the interesting thing about synesthesia, and if you read The Reconnection, I referred to it in that book. I didn't use the word synesthesia. I called it transsensory because it transcends your senses.
Yes.
When suddenly you're tasting music, you can't really explain that, but you are. So you really become more hyper aware in a sense, and expansively aware simultaneously. What's intriguing about it is that it's something that science doesn't yet understand and
Right.
can't explain, one of many things. And so what happens when science can't explain something and it shows up in the scientific or the medical world? They consider it something that shouldn't be. So they try to treat it. They consider it a problem. And they help people separate and leave synesthesia instead of understanding that, hey, wow, what an amazing empowerment of perspective and understanding and, of course, awareness.
And I think with the onset of quantum physics and, this idea that we live in a quantum-based universe is kind of important because, as Eric, you just pointed out, when it is not perceived to be appropriate for, I'm going to say, the organization of how we perceive the universe, our daily life, then we separate.
Right.
And it's just right in this moment with the onset of quantum physics, with the onset of understanding that we don't live in a cause-effect universe, that actually we affect what we perceive. Now, this idea of transsensory or synesthesia is, I think, right at the precipice of being sort of welcomed in. Now, we've seen it in, I'm going to say, a welcoming in of ancient practices. So the journey work that we often find in various different healing techniques, even psychedelics, where we have seen in the past people use mind perception altering substances, plant medicines, whatever it is, because we understand now the realm beyond just our 4D perception is available. Why is reconnective healing so simple and basic to be able to give us this exposure or experience? And part of that lies in just the mechanics. Even though science can't explain it, one of the things we've known early on is that height, width, depth, and time with these frequencies was something that showed up when the more, as you just spoke of, started to present itself. And I think it's worth it just to explain how that more presented itself. Yes?
But before we do that, I want to explain also that, transcending the senses through the reconnective healing frequencies happens instantly, immediately, not even noticeably. In other words, you don't notice moving from 4D into that expanded awareness. It just takes place. You sort of notice it when you're there and you go, oh my God, I was there. And look where I am now. So really, we don't have to do anything external. We don't have to take plant medicines or anything else. We don't have to go into lengthy journeys or this or that or the other. Really, what happens is we just remove what has been inhibiting us from being a fuller, more integrated
Yes.
essence.
And in that you have just described is the next thing that perhaps we're ready for, which is to release all the steps and procedures, all of the techniques that actually we perceive get us from here to there. See, reconnective healing is giving you a glimpse into everywhere, not a here to there. It releases the box entirely, which is what very early on in how these frequencies, the energy, light, and information couldn't be captured quite in that linear way. How could someone who had a very specific diagnostic physical limitation, visually perceptible, x-rays, MRIs, how could an alteration of that take place instantaneously without there being a interaction? I'm going to say even more than an interaction from something outside of what we could perceive. And that's really, I'm going to say, the basis of us in Reconnective Healing, looking to explore how, not the why and not the what, but how, and in some ways, we can recognize this rather than try so much to understand everything about it, right?
It's a freedom.
Yeah.
When we let go of trying to find it, trying to do something to get there, and allow ourselves to be. I mean, I think really that's the way it interacted with me in the beginning. It's sort of in a space of my just being in a presence and an awareness of receiving. It sort of reached out and said, hello, here I am. And in that interaction, as I was receiving it, sharing that field with at that time another patient of mine, that patient was receiving it. And really, this is a lot of how reconnective healing has spread so amazingly around the globe right now. It's just from allowing ourselves to receive. And part of anything that sort of limits it or slows it down is just maybe sometimes an insecurity around the concept of receiving. Is receiving taking? Am I worthy to receive? It's those questioning issues that we find we no longer have when we allow ourselves to just exist in a state of being.
I would say we might not find that we no longer have them exactly because releasing this idea is an idea. And so we are definitely challenged in reconnective healing to question, where did even our ideologies disappear to, right? The entire way we've understood things often in this exchange disappears because this intelligence, as you just pointed out, is reaching and we become receivers. And I like to think of it sometimes as, what's the difference between when you're plugged in, meaning, let's even say you have access to your Bluetooth frequency, right? It's the frequency of how we were designed. Let's assume, and we don't assume this in reconnective healing, we know it as fact. We are designed to be receivers. So once we grasp this role, and it's almost a role, and responsibility, then in that very understanding, we start to move beyond ourselves, and we're able to see ourselves specifically in that receiver capacity or role. And then energy, light, and information knows exactly how to interact there. We don't even have to be cognizantly aware of it. And often, more than often, takes a little bit of time.
See what
linear time, right? To catch up with what has already occurred.
So what makes reconnective healing a quantum process is that we don't realize it's a quantum process. What I mean by that is we are so used to Keanu Reeves movies and others in the quantum field where all of a sudden it looks like people are just slowly moving through the air. And
which we are.
Everything's slowed down. Yeah, I know. But to the person, it doesn't look that way. It doesn't feel that way. You don't feel like you're making a huge quantum leap because you are quantum. So our perspective of it is viewing it from height, width, depth, and time. And so it looks different to us. When you're actually in a quantum existence, you don't notice the transformation. That's what's purely quantum about it. There's no trying, there's no efforting, there's no anything different except for a greater awareness, which is really a greater state of observation, because as we said, awareness is the observer.
Awareness is the observer. And we become more attuned as we continue to receive. And again, the receiving isn't something we have to do. The energy, light, and information is quite clear on how it reaches to us. And in that, fortunately, there's some tangibility involved. We can observe it even with just our eyes, not even in a state of awareness, just simple 4D awareness, we can observe it. But beyond that, we need to recognize that our perception is always catching up with the multidimensional existence that we are organized as. And so if we want to rely specifically on what we can perceive, then again, we're not truly able to see ourselves.
And what we can perceive here is only this much of what we can perceive there. And then we start to think of, well, what's the difference between here and there? Nothing spatially, simply awareness, existence.
So operating in a embodied daily life with the perception of that which we are outside of space and time is part of one of the most beautiful aspects of learning reconnective healing and becoming a part of what this intelligence is as energy, light, and information. And even more so, for me, recognizing in total understanding that I was designed to be a receiver. And in that, the allowing just is there. And everything is possible.
So receive this, and we will talk outside of another space and time.